Hey everyone, I couldn't help myself, and I had some more thoughts on this individualism, communitarianism thing. So I'm particularly fascinated with this concept as of late because my perspective on it has been changing. I was just sitting in here earlier speaking with one of my colleagues from the psych department. So here's the thing. A solid amount of research in psychology and a lot of other perspectives suggest that we're social creatures first, and that we later carve out individualism for ourselves, an individual identity separate from our families, separate from our immediate communities. All right, and then we, as individuals, relocate ourselves in those communities. So it's sort of like this separation from and then reintegration into, if that makes sense. Okay, so for that reason, we're social creatures, and this is like anthropologically, psychologically, sociologically, so painfully obvious. But what does that mean for how what we should do about rights and responsibilities, right? Well, it could be that because we are innately social creatures, tribal creatures, that we need to focus on individual rights to balance the default settings, right, in our psychology and in our biology. And so maybe you'd say something like, well, something like I just said, where we need to focus on individual rights, because if we just leave it up to whatever, then group identity, group cohesion, and in-group and out-group conflict is going to predominate. And we want to avoid that, because just because something is natural or more likely to happen based on our predilections doesn't always mean it's good. And an easy example of that would be racism, right? Racism is a fairly natural human occurrence. And if you think that the United States is the most racist, terrible place in the world, please go anywhere else. Racism is bad, of course, and I don't mean to belittle or demean people that suffer from it, but perspective, please. And so that's a bad thing. Okay, so then focusing on individual rights can mitigate that natural occurrence of groups banding together based on easy markers, stereotypes, which in the past served humans fairly well. In a diverse society like ours, doesn't serve us very well. Okay, so maybe it's that we are social creatures and we need to focus on the rights to balance those two things out. Okay, maybe that's true. Then I started to think, and I don't know if I mentioned this in a video, but certainly in my classroom discussions, communitarianism is weird. Now, people, I think, have misunderstood it, and I'm reading the assignments, I think this is fair to say. Many people think it's far more to the collective side of things than it really is. You have to remember, and I said this in a previous video, we are in the United States currently very individualistic, to the point of radically individualistic, which is an unhealthy side of the other spectrum. It's the unhealthy extreme on the other side. Collectivism over here, bad, right? Radical individualism over here, bad. And so we started out somewhere in a middle ground, moving towards greater individualism and rights during the era of enlightenment, right? Age of Enlightenment. And we've consistently moved further and further towards radical individualism, where we're closer to that now than at any time or place in history. Etzioni is calling for balance. So he's not saying the group needs to be the most important thing. He's saying we need to balance the group with the individual, which I think, at least as a starting point, is a fair thing to say. But again, I was saying that communitarianism is weird because it's got its foot on two different sides of the political philosophy, right? So there's conservative elements in the concept of group cohesion and those types of things, group responsibility. This limits the freedom of the individual. This is very anti-liberal. But then if you read Etzioni's writing, and we've looked at a little bit of it in week 2, he talks about a dislike for free markets and capitalism because he doesn't like to see the wealth inequality. And I don't think his solutions are good solutions, but they're at least proposed solutions, right? If you just cap what the top earners can make, then you limit wealth inequality. It's not like you can go further down than starvation and death. So up is where we cap, and that will mitigate wealth inequality, potentially come with a host of other problems. And I think the problems that it creates are probably worse than the problems that it solves. Either way, there are left-leaning elements, certainly within communitarian philosophy. It's very socially liberal, it appears. And in some ways that's good or bad, it's not the point. So there's socially liberal left-leaning elements and economically left-leaning elements. And then there are was it right-leaning social and personal freedom limiting perspectives that are much more conservative, and not even necessarily classically liberal conservative, but conservative. This makes it kind of a hard pitch for people, because it would force us to consider that most of our political affiliations we currently have are rather incoherent and don't fit together cleanly. Like, if you think about all the things the Democrat Party has as a list of things that are important to them, or that their policy platforms, or the Republicans, doesn't matter, they don't always necessarily fit together in any coherent way. Now, libertarians, they're crazy, and their plans for how to run a government, well, almost by definition would fail, because libertarians don't like governments. But it's a logically consistent and coherent philosophy, but it's actually bad at governing or winning seats in politics anyway. So that's one problem with communitarianism, is it's disparate in ways that seem rather incoherent. Now, to that end, I want to suggest a couple things. I already hinted at it. There's conservative and liberal, or far left and far right, maybe, or left and right perspectives within communitarianism that make it hard to sell, maybe in this particular political culture. But then I started to think, all right, regardless of the spectrum or where things are at, what does it mean to move in a communitarian direction? Now, we're currently very rights-based, very individualistic, to the point where it's maybe not so healthy. So, okay, so he's saying, Etzioni and communitarians in general, saying a shift at least towards the center or away from radical individualism would be a step in the right direction. Okay, let's say I agree. Maybe I do. Then the question is, all right, if we're going to balance the health of the group against the rights and freedoms of the individual, what does that mean? Like, seriously, alcohol's not really a social good. It's a thing we want, and as free people, we consume it. There's a strong demand for it. We tried to outlaw it once. That didn't go well. It created a huge black market of crime. So that was the only amendment we ever repealed, right? The 18th Amendment. Would we ban the consumption of alcohol or any drug, cigarettes, tobacco? Would all of that stuff just be like, you know what? I know individuals enjoy it, but it's a social ill. And if we're talking about nationalized single-payer healthcare, your personal actions now affect the group, because we're paying for your decisions, not just you. We're all paying for your drinking, your smoking, your whatever. So maybe in a communitarian system, drug use, alcohol consumption, all that stuff, off the table. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. Pornography. Like or dislike pornography, there's a massive supply of it and a massive demand for it. And it is, from most all psychological research, it's detrimental to the consumer and the producer. But in a free society, we allow people to do things that are not healthy. If the group now becomes, or if the rights of the group or the importance of the group at least rises, is pornography something we say it's a social ill? It's not good for the people that produce pornography. It objectifies them. It's not good for the people that consume pornography, because it causes them to objectify other people. And it has other, I don't know all the psychological research. I just know that psychologists say it's bad. Is that off the table? No more of that. Speech. Some of you have hinted at this in your weekly assignments. We have free speech. It's a very individualistic type of freedom. If the group and the group cohesion becomes more important than it currently is, are there some types of speech that we can limit? I'm assuming yes. I don't know what those types of things would be, but it's not a small concern. Given all of those possibilities, one of the questions asked of you in the assignment was, what role does the government have in any of this? And just to be clear, look what the founders thought, because that's at least an anchor point. The founders firmly believed that the government, a political entity with the coercive power of guns and jails, right, and a court system and legislation and all that, had no business legislating morality, or minimal business legislating morality. To that end, they were very much in favor of the private practice of religion, such that separate from government control. People can go and join religious institutions, participate in them, have their spiritual needs fulfilled, and form community bonds and obligations separate from the government. You go to church or the mosque or the temple, whatever you do with your religion, there are things that institution tells you are good or bad that you should or should not do in your own life and in relationship to other people. That's where our founders thought that was most appropriately settled, in the private sector, away from the government and away from the coercive power of the government. So that if we are now having a discussion about what is the role in government, about legislating moral behavior or behavior that is for the good of the group, what types of things can the government do? Banning alcohol, banning drugs, banning pornography, banning certain types of speech. The list goes far beyond what I'm just suggesting now, but it does beg the question, if we do want to go in that direction, and if the government plays a role in determining what is good for the group, that actually can get pretty scary pretty fast. Cool. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Talk again soon.